Conversations in the Arts and Ideas, a series that brings artists, writers, performers, and public figures to speak on topics of essential relevance to human values and creativity. I'm James Johnson. I'm here on behalf of the faculty committee that's responsible for this series. And I'm also here to thank the sponsors of Conversations in the Arts and Ideas. They are the Boston University Center for the Humanities, Kilachand Honors College, the Office of the Provost, the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, the Elie Wiesel Center for Jewish Studies, the BU Arts Initiative, and the College of Arts and Sciences core curriculum. We're grateful to these sponsors who share the conviction that the arts and humanities should be an important presence not only in universities, but in civic and national conversations about our defining beliefs and ideals, about ethics and questions of justice, about imagination and human possibility. I want to thank as well Tamsin Flanders of the BU Center for the Humanities and Carrie Preston, Director of the Honors College, for the extraordinary work they have put into this event tonight. Tonight's interviewer and interlocutor with our guest is the poet Crystal Williams. Her most recent book of poetry is called Detroit as Barn. She is also the Vice President and Associate Provost for Community and Inclusion at Boston University. If you have questions during this conversation that you would like to be posed to our guest, please use the question tab on your screen. We will do all we can to include as many of these questions in the conversation. And now to introduce our guest for tonight is Harvey Young, who is the Dean of the College of Fine Arts, Professor of English, and the author of numerous books and articles on African American theater and performance. Dean Young.
Thank you. It is my honor to introduce Teju Cole, a novelist, photographer, curator, cultural critic, professor of creative writing, and so much more. Highlights of a distinguished career include his novel Open City, which was awarded Book of the Year honors by the New Yorker, the LA Times, and the Boston Globe. His book Every Day is for the Thief, which appeared on year-end lists for the New York Times, the Guardian, and the Globe and Mail. His book of photographs, Blind Spot, was named a Time Magazine top nonfiction book of the year. And more recently, his essay collection, Known and Strange Things, again, a Time and Guardian best book. These accolades evidence Teju Cole as a person with whom you not only want to engage in the moment, but whose words and thoughts invite you to retrospectively return again and again. Looking back on a year or a decade of reading, it is Cole's insights, his words, his perspectives that resonate. It is a voice that remains with you. In 2017, The Guardian described Teju Cole as, and I quote, a writer for our times, prodigious, wide-ranging, and supremely confident about his reach. Certainly this confidence is evidenced in the seeming ease with which he moves across literary and visual genres. From the letter to the visual story, this confidence can be seen in his embodied presence, a Black man often solo with a camera, traveling, touring, drifting through places where the sight of Blackness can range from the easily overlooked, the eye-catchingly curious, to a prompt for profiling and violence. More randomly, I think, this confidence can be seen in his music playlists. And we've all created them, those sort of Spotify playlists with 10 or 20 songs that we share with our friends. Well, Teju Cole demonstrates real mastery and indeed swagger with his 115 tracks of his most recent playlist, Fresco. There is so much more to say, but we're here to hear from Teju Cole, not about Teju Cole. I will close by spotlighting one aspect of Cole's work as an author and critic that personally resonates with me. Teju Cole understands how ideas, phrases, perspectives circulate in the world. He gets how a work of art can inspire, can awaken oneself to their surroundings, and can prompt introspection as well as curiosity about others. He has a felt sense of the flow of influences. And of course, he himself is influential. So please join me in welcoming Teju Cole.
Thank you, Harvey.
Thank you so very much.
Yeah. Teju, I am thrilled to be in this conversation with you. And I'm thrilled to have so many of our students and colleagues here also in the conversation with us. I thought that we might walk through 4 sort of general strains of thinking. And those are developed in conversation with some questions that students have submitted in advance of this conversation. So the 4 strains of thinking are about you, sort of level setting, just some basic principles, some basic principles. Art and activism, photography and ethics, and displacement and migration. And I really do I hope that students will understand this to be a conversation between you and me and themselves. And then we will open up to immediate questions towards the tail end of this conversation.
Great.
So I think before that, I just also want to say thanks to Jim and Carrie, who really put so much work into this endeavor, and thanks to Harvey for that wonderful introduction of your work, which actually sets up the first question that I have for you. And I want to talk to you a little bit about duality. So, you heard that I'm a poet, and in poetry there's a form which you may know, and it's taken from a musical term, counterpoint, right? In poetry, the form is called the contrapuntal. So you could be, it's essentially a form in which there are, you can have 1 poem, 2 poems, 3 poems, however many poems that are sort of side by side, and they operate as individual entities, right? They're fully themselves. But when you read across, you have poem 1, poem 2, and then across is poem 3. And this seemed to me to be something to talk to you about, given your background, right? You've born in Kalamazoo, raised in Nigeria. Educational background, started in medicine, art history, cultural critic, photography, writing. You've got multiple independent strains happening at once. And I'm interested to understand your thinking about, are you actually creating a third thing, a whole that is larger than the sum of its parts with intention? Are you yourself a kind of contrapuntal?
Wow, what a beautiful question. Is it going to be like this all night? I
I'm
mean,
gonna try.
you're going to give me a beautiful flowing question and I'm going to say, wow, yes. Thank you so much. Just before I get started, I want to thank everybody for the hospitality of this visit. As I was saying in our remarks before we open it up to the audience, I particularly feel the loss of not doing this in person, because I would not have had to get on a plane. I would just have had to come across the river. So, but we all sit together in optimism that in the next few months, in-person things will start to become normal again. And I wanted to especially thank Dean Harvey Young for that very beautiful introduction. I'm very moved by it, and I feel like I want to try to live up to it. That's a great question about duality and the contrapuntal, because for me, I would say it's a central principle. I think of 2 forebears whose work I think about a lot, especially with reference to two-ness. One is Chinua Achebe, the wonderful Nigerian novelist who died about 8 years ago. Achebe's probably his favorite Igbo proverb was, where one thing stands, another will stand by it. So this idea that things are not by themselves in the world, that twinship is a natural condition. And I very much like the way it's in contradistinction to a lot of things about Western culture that valorize the individual, the solitary. Who is the person who discovered this river? And it's like, the river's always been there. And actually the people who lived on that river knew its name, Who is the first person to get to the top of that mountain? Who is the one person we give this prize to, you know, the valorization of the one person. Our idea of a book, for example, is something that has a single author, but that's just the way our culture functions. And the other person I think about relative to this is Fred Moten, who talks about, well, he writes a lot about jazz music, but there's a passage in Black and Blue where he's talking about accompaniment, you know, and we think we understand that word. Oh, in jazz, this, and you know, Coltrane is on the sax and accompanying on the piano is McCoy Tyner, but he just really zeroes in on this idea of accompaniment, the one who goes with, you know, and this idea that so much of our work is to try to intentionally accompany each other. So I sort of want to start it there. This idea that there's nothing that we're doing that's by ourselves, you know, that things happen because many hands are involved. And that certainly happens in my own sense of my work. You know, there's family and there's friends and there's, you know, there's assistants and there's, you know, colleagues and, you know, there's writers and critics and all of this stuff, all to that moment where then somebody's reading your CV and it sounds as if you're heroic. But, you know, but you actually have to acknowledge the fact that many people got you there so that then the voicing in the work can then not be satisfied with me, mine. And I would say that is why my work is always trying to interrogate this question of what the we is, you know. I mean, I think the word we is used a lot in writing, but I'm specifically interested in querying it and expanding who can be included, you know, who is being spoken for, who's not being spoken for in any work that's being done, who's being imagined into the work as a possible audience. Do you know what I mean? I mean, like sometimes you confront a work and you can tell that work has not even imagined you as a reader or as a viewer, and I want to have work that is capacious in its imagining.
So it's interesting. I mean, you've taken us already down a new avenue of thinking, and I'm interested to explore a little bit. So you've named Achebe, you've named Moten, and I was in a conversation the other day with a poet friend of mine. We were talking about ekphrastic poetry, so poetry that, and she and I both are poets who, whether it's visual or audio, right, we're constantly in conversation with, and the art of creation is a mutual endeavor. So I want to understand from you these two names that you have talked about. Are they among the names that are most seminal to your development as a thinker, as an artist, as a doer in the world? So that's a part of the question. I'm going to ask you the other part of the question, which is, and if not they, who? That's not the other part of the question. The other part of the question is, has there been a moment when you were aware that there was a pre and a post Teju in relation to being in community in this way with others, with Achebe, with Moten, or whomever it is? I'm asking you a before and after question.
Yeah, wow, that's a great question, and it's an expansive question about, you know, the question of influence.
Yes.
And it's so good to be in this conversation, truly. I mean, I can see that even though we cannot see who's sitting in the room with us right now, we have, you know, almost 280 people here. So again, kudos to the organizers and, you know, everybody who made it possible, and everybody who showed up with their time to listen to us. I really wish I could see people's faces, but I'm going to imagine everybody's face. And yet, even though it's a large room, I feel like this is a good opportunity to try to talk honestly about these things. And so what I think the first thing I'll say is that if I came to the United States from Nigeria at the age of 17 for college. I went to Kalamazoo College in Michigan. I went to Columbia University. I went to the University of London. So in both those other two places for grad school. You know, I'm at Harvard now, so I've known universities. I dropped out of University of Michigan Medical School.
Yes, you do.
I guess I should also count that, give them their due, you know. What it means to have been educated well,
Mhm.
which I think by most of these conventional metrics, not as well educated as some, but I'm educated pretty well, you know. I've got like, you know, a little handful of degrees, some nice universities. What it means to have been educated well is to have been educated into whiteness.
Yes.
This is how it is, whatever color you are. These are the priorities that are laid before you. And it is particularly perilous for those of us who are in the humanities.
Mhm.
Because what is valorized to us as canonical. So you show up as a young kid from Africa,
Mhm.
you're absorbing everything like a sponge, but
Mhm.
you're actually not absorbing everything. You're absorbing what's in the libraries.
That's
You're absorbing what's playing at the film forum. You're absorbing what is in the concert hall. So it becomes a kind of a truly partial education.
Mhm.
And yet I don't sort of divide life now into who has the right set of references and who has the wrong set of references, who says the right names and who doesn't say the right names. For me, it's more a process of saying, how do you build, given that you have been punished with this good education,
Mhm.
how do you build for yourself a more capacious
Mhm.
community? You know, now that you're entering maturity and you know that the world is big and it's deep,
Mhm.
how do you start seeking out
Mhm.
the people whom you were not placed in the presence of? You know, I mean, Lauryn Hill is a genius for many reasons,
Yes, she is.
but entitling that album "The Miseducation of
Yes.
Lauryn Hill," many of us have been miseducated,
Yes.
and we don't find out until until later. Rather, that earlier would be strange. We don't find out until later. It hits us like a hangover, and you say, "What's with all the omissions?" You know. So, for me, not a before or after, but
Mhm.
an ongoingness to keep giving more and more possibilities their due. When I was in college, even when I was in grad school, I wasn't reading Saidiya Hartman. I mean, that was not on the horizon, you know. But just because I read Saidiya Hartman does not mean that I can't learn from Rilke or from Kierkegaard. You know, we're born fit for it. You know, the capacity is actually there. We just have to help each other along this journey. So when I say Achebe, when I say Moten, it is part of really a part of a forest of voices,
Mhm.
you know. And as a creative person, I've learned something about originality vis-a-vis influence,
Mhm.
which is that again, this heroic valorization, making heroic the idea of originality, the springing from the head of Zeus, you know, is actually not the way it is.
Mhm.
You know, what we're actually doing is reiterating in our own voice
Mhm.
what the commonality has arrived at, you
You
know.
know, what's interesting about what you're saying right now is um, I agree that in this culture, to use your word, we valorize, but in certain fields, in the arts especially, I'm interested um, I'm not all that interested in it. Let me restate. I find disturbing the emphasis on virtuosity, right? Technical virtuosity versus heart and soul, and the reiteration, to use your word, of something meaningful that is relevant to this context.
That's right.
And I'm interested in your thinking on that. In particular, we've got a lot of very young people, many of whom I suspect are artists or creatives. And the question of how to find something to say that is original is always in the creative space, right? Young people always want to ask this question. And I hear you saying something slightly different. Can you open that up a little bit for young creatives? This question about valorization, originality, voice, community.
That's right. I mean, I think the thing to say about virtuosity is that it has its uses. Virtuosity, by which we mean the mastery of the craft according to pre-established principles, is something that you have to actually get into the room. You know, you want to be taken seriously. You want to be in that room where that conversation is happening. You need to have your skills. You need to have the ability. If you're working in language, you need to know how language works. You know, if you're a violinist, you need to learn to play it very well before you learn how to play it funky. You know, before you get to be Nina Simone, you need to go through knowing piano the way Nina Simone knew piano. And then you can do Nina Simone things with the piano. There is no one who was better in terms of the ability in playing a wind instrument than John Coltrane. Just simply because he practiced more than everybody else through his whole life. But what you have to keep in mind is that that is not your destination. And the tragedy of so many artists is that they think knowing how to do it is the destination. No, you have to know how to do it so that you come to a place where you don't know how to do it.
Is this what you mean by, you talk about seeking freedom? Is this how you get
Absolutely. It's about freedom, but it's also about understanding that presence is more important than originality.
What do you mean by that?
You know, originality is the wow moment. It's the or what looks like originality, right? It's like, we've never seen anybody play it that fast before, you know? Yeah. But presence cannot be faked. When somebody's really there, when somebody's really holding the note, when somebody's really holding the space, when an actor goes deep down inside and then brings something out, when a filmmaker edits in a certain way. Last night, I watched a film called Time. I'm sure you've heard of it, by Garrett Bradley. It's a documentary film about doing time in a penitentiary. It's about a woman who, for 20 years, has been trying to get her husband out of Angola.
Oh my gosh, what a horrible place.
In Louisiana. You know all about that.
Yeah.
He did an armed robbery, not a murder. I think he was in his 20s, and he got 60 years for it because that's how they do. And she has been struggling to get him out, and she was documenting it all the way.
Wow.
But the filmmaking, it's on Amazon Prime. We don't want to give Jeff Bezos our money, but you got to watch this film. And it's just been nominated Oscar for Best Documentary. The filmmaker is a young Black woman called Garrett Bradley. And it is easily one of the 2 or 3 best films I've seen made in this country in the past 5 years. It is that good.
Wow. Okay.
Yes, yes. But such was her skill that I'm assessing this. It's good. Yeah, oh wow, that's well handled. In the last 15 minutes, there were tears in my eyes. That's what I mean by presence.
Yes.
When somebody is able to go past mere technical skill and checking the boxes and doing the things that they feel they ought to be able to do to show that they're skilled, and then going deep into that human place where we all live. Something I noticed as a young artist, and even now that I guess I'm approaching middle age, was that usually when you listen to sort of like the top voices in the arts, the people we really cherish and love, and they're being interviewed, there was something that always connected them with each other, regardless of the particular art they were practicing.
And what is it?
I mean, truly, it's like, I don't know if let's say, okay, Toni Morrison can't really be compared to anyone else, but let's say so.
Persist. Go for it.
When you're talking about the Most High, you gotta like sort of proceed carefully. But let's say Toni Morrison interview, or Seamus Heaney, or John Berger, or Fellini, or whomever. There's a level at which you listen to their interviews and they're talking about being a person.
Yes.
They're talking about, and as a young artist, I found it frustrating because I was like, no, tell me how to do a novel.
Yes.
Give me the technical stuff. Tell me how to make a poem. No. Why did you cut that film here and do this thing over here? At that level of the game, they're mostly telling you about pay attention to what kind of a human being you are, because that's what the work is going to come out of. That is really what lasts. The people who have found a way to make the stuff that's going to remind us of those resonant places of experience. Is this making sense?
It is. And I have one more question in the about you bucket before we move into some of these other buckets. And it's related to this. You've talked about a commitment that you have to simplicity, to speaking simply. Let me say that differently, right? In your written or visual work. And this reminds me of Morrison. It reminds me of Clifton, Lucille Clifton, who's one of my favorite poets, right? People who say things of great magnitude without artifice. And I'm interested in your thinking about what are the virtues of speaking plainly, whether it's through photographs or written. Why is this an aspiration? Does this have to do with what you were just talking about in terms of just being settled and understanding and being in your own humanity as an artist, and then communicate that out?
Precisely, right? So very much about being settled in it, very much out of a sense of something that you're doing on behalf of others.
Yes.
So it's not me tap. It's hard to be a humble tap dancer. That's kind of hard because it's about display and it's about the glitter, and that's great. Even though, of course, some of the real sublime tap dancers are also not about me. But it's hard. But when we're thinking about literature and we're thinking about, I sometimes think about the kind of book I might reach for at 4 a.m. in the morning if I have a bout of insomnia. What am I reaching for? I'm reaching for something that goes right to the core.
Yes. The truth.
At 4 in the morning, I have no tolerance for bullshit.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I not at that time. At that time, at 4 in the morning, the house is quiet and I'm confronted with my own mortality.
Yes.
I can hear my own heart pounding in my chest. I
Yes.
want somebody to give it to me the way it is. I reach for Thomas Tranströmer,
Mhm.
you know, and for the way he speaks to what it is like to be a human being gently trying to figure out what this aloneness is
Yes.
and saying, are you out there? Can you hear me?
Mhm.
So the simplicity is not at all about simple-mindedness.
No. Yep.
It's about saying that, see, in my mid 20s, it was all about late James Joyce. If I was ever going to write a novel, I mean, you know what I mean? It's like Finnegan's Wake has already been written.
Yeah.
So whatever I write has to be that next level of complexity.
Yeah.
Oof, I tried it. I was about, 22. I was about, 23. Unreadable,
Yeah.
unbearable.
Yeah.
At some time in my late 20s, I realized that what I really wanted to do was put down on paper the most complex thoughts that I had.
Yep.
Because I got to respect myself as a human being, and I have very complex things happening in here, but to put it down in the simplest language that structurally it would tolerate.
Mm-hmm. That's an important distinction that you're making.
The most complex thoughts, the simplest
Yes.
language.
Well,
No wasted gestures.
yes, but what I think it's important, I want to pinpoint what you've said, because you said in the most simple sort of vessel that could hold the thing that I was saying. And that's an important distinction.
Yeah. It's not about not being complex. It's about not being confused, not being obtuse, not being noisy.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to revise what I'm saying very slightly and say there are aspects of this that absolutely have to do with individual style. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
this is what helps me, and this is what I'm drawn to. I think some people have a much more Baroque style, and they are great artists. Mm-hmm. Some people are very dramatic in their approach. Mm-hmm. But even when we go to Shakespeare, mm-hmm. who is not a minimalist,
mm-hmm. I wouldn't no.
Right?
Yeah.
And yet, even in his large word choices, we get a sense of aptness.
Yes.
We get a sense that this is the word for the occasion. Mm-hmm. It never actually devolves into noise because it can withstand interrogation, it can withstand analysis. So if you want to go Baroque, you have to be sure that you have behind it the force of that thinking that merits mm-hmm. such, imbricated language, to use a big word.
There's I was talking to a friend of mine who's working on a memoir, and he was having a hard time. And I don't know why we got off on this strain of talking or strain of conversation, but I did say to him, and what you're saying reminds me of this. Sometimes when I'm not feeling well, mm-hmm. and I don't have much depth going mm-hmm. on, right? I have this scarf that is so exuberant. Mm. It is an unbelievable scarf. I got it
yes.
score, right?
Yes.
So I can put that scarf on and it's big puffy and no one looks at me. Mm-hmm. No one sees me. They don't know that actually I'm not really tracking right then, right? Because mm-hmm, they're looking at the scarf.
That's right.
And there is a lot of art that is like that. It is the noisy scarf, right? That's and so right. I hear what you're saying in some ways to be an argument against noisy scarves.
Yes, except that
Yeah.
I think then bringing back my caveat, which is that, the experiential landscape is made up of very many things.
Yes, that's
And,
true.
and I think, part of the question for anybody in any of the arts is to figure out, who am I? What do I want to make manifest?
Yes.
Um,
Yep.
Consolation is a big thing for me,
Mhm.
and intimacy,
Mhm.
and the voice that is at mezzo,
Mhm.
not the very loudest,
Mhm.
Because I know that's what reaches me, given my temperament. So that's what I want to put out into the world, So I'm not saying anything here that is supposed to, I hope the theater kids don't feel like I'm I'm offending them, because there's room for messiness and drama and noise and all of that. There's
Yeah.
room for everything, but you have to figure out what you want to manifest in the world.
Yeah.
And for me, one of the main functions of art, for me,
Mhm.
is that it is a kind of a secular priesthood.
Mhm.
You know, um, uh, there is absolutely nothing wrong with wearing a Speedo.
Mhm.
You might find it a little bit strange if a priest wore a Speedo
Mhm.
in church at the altar.
Yes, a little.
Right. So there are kind of questions of decorum
Mhm. Mhm.
in the formal presentation of the
Mhm.
work, even though what's happening in the work itself could be very radical,
Mhm.
but there are forms that we adopt as forms of calling to attention, calling you into a space. That's why we edit our work. That's why we copy edit, and get the right font, and we print it, and it's between two covers, and there's this quiet thing that's presented to someone, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't matter. We would just send off PDFs to people. But so much of art is also about creating a sense of occasion, so that the thing that you have to say can be heard.
So I want to pivot a little bit, and uh, I've got a bunch of questions, some from our students about art and activism, um,
Mhm.
and we're in the middle of a global pandemic. These glaring health and economic disparities, authoritarianism,
Mhm.
xenophobia, white supremacists,
Mhm.
aggression, all of this is on the rise. We see it more clearly now after this year.
Mhm.
And um, you've said, quote, artists are always looking for the right language to confront what is in the world.
Mhm.
Do you think that it's true that all artists are seeking to confront what is in the world? Um,
Right. That's a good question. Is or is it an ought? You
yes,
know.
that is exactly the second
Mm,
question, the follow-up
mm,
question I'm going to
mm.
get. Yeah.
Yeah. I think artists are as varied as the communities in which they are present, the communities they serve or fail to serve. I think some confront and some confirm, and some confound. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
So um, let's just say it's not one church, right? It's schismatic. Um, if I could revise what I said in that situation, I would say that one of the roles of the artist is to confront injustice. I always like quoting this thing Anne Carson said about tragedy,
Mhm.
that we call them actors because they act for us, that you don't want to go down into your own tragedy, into the basement of your own experience all by yourself. So the actor takes you by the hand and goes down to that space with you. Um, the artist's search for language is something that is done for the common weal, right? I don't think it's an overstatement to say that this has been a distressing and confusing time in the life of our country. The last 4 years, the last 1 year,
Yes. Yep.
the last few months.
Mhm.
And we've needed all different kinds of help with that.
Mhm.
We need help in terms of policy. We need help in terms of democracy. We need help in terms of how our communities are having their material needs met. And we also need help in terms of the dreams that are made available to us for the future. And this is where artists can come in, and say, imagine this, or let me describe how things are right now. Let me also describe how things could be. You don't want the worst thing in your life to happen to you, and then you feel like nobody has seen it.
Yes.
It's like a
Yes.
double pain. So when the artist describes something, even when that artist doesn't know you, but when the artist describes heartbreak or grief or mourning or loneliness or shame, and you read that, you feel, okay, I'm feeling these things and it's painful, but I'm not the only person in the world who has gone through this. So I think that is one of the functions of what an artist does.
Thank you. So you've just answered 3 questions that I had, which I appreciate.
Very good. Excellent.
So I want to, there's sort of 2 interrelated questions
Yeah.
to do with language, and I'm gonna try and mush them together, since you actually seem to be able to hold my mushing together of things.
Sure.
So as a writer, how do you respond? So this actually came directly from one of our students, to the use of words or phrases whose meanings flatten with time, overuse, misappropriation. So, right, examples would be decolonize the curriculum, or decolonize the canon, or defund the police, or intersectionality. Or a phrase like that you've termed, right, white savior industrial complex. This language can get torqued in a way that is ultimately not useful. So that's
right.
one of the questions. The other part of the question, related, and there were several along these lines, had to do with the dialectic between the strong use of language, or the use of strong language like white savior industrial and alienating people, as one of our students writes, who want to be a force of good in the world. So these things I think of as being related.
They are, yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, great. Let's get into it. Politics time.
There
All
you
right. Here we are. We might as well do it.
Exactly.
I'll pick one word.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, so we'll answer a question about language that maybe had some force behind it, and then it becomes like things people say, and then it's understood to be sort of like a negative thing.
Yeah.
So I'll pick one word and talk about that. And then we'll talk about this question of people who are feeling alienated because some of the language or some of the discourse is a bit tough for them.
Yes.
Okay. The word I want to pick is woke.
Yeah.
I think very recently, maybe just in the past couple of years, woke went from maybe something that was happening among a fairly small group of our activists to something that that people hear it now and they sort of panic. In fact, it has become one of those words that is more often evoked in the negative than in the positive. So rarely does somebody say, oh, we've got to be woke. What they say is, oh, I'm not woke, but, or, oh, I'm all for progressive ideas, but I'm not one of these woke people.
Yep.
why did it become negative?
Mhm.
And I think part of what's happening there, which is not often surfaced in these public conversations, endless op-eds by people about how, oh, the forces of woke, cancel culture, they don't ever acknowledge the fact that woke emerged out of young African American people reminding each other to remain alert
Yeah.
in a system that treats them with dangerous and sometimes deadly disregard.
Here you mean phrases like "stay woke."
Yeah,
Yeah, as a
it's African American vernacular English.
as a warning,
Stay
honey.
woke.
I love you. Stay woke.
Stay woke. Don't fall asleep because
That's
stuff is happening.
That's right.
Okay. Now, that which, in other words, it was a language that people used in a meaningful sense among each other.
Yes.
It migrated out into the wider world.
Yes.
And for people who did not like the implications of what it was telling them to do, rather than change what they're doing, they would rather attack the language itself as retrograde or something.
Mhm.
So I think anybody who's listening who has a tendency to say, well, I'm not one of these woke people. Well, first of all, no, you're not. But secondly, why not?
Right.
You know, what are you so afraid of? If you think about young Black people reminding each other to be alert,
Mhm.
what is it about that notion that not only are you afraid of, but you're not even willing to credit as the source of this thought? What we do with language is that we recognize that it's alive.
Mhm.
So we come up with words, we use them for liberation and for uplift and for making our conditions better. And once it goes out into the wider world and it gets spoiled, that's okay. We'll make up new words. Language is always alive. We'll always find the language we need to speak to each other about imagining a better future than this one. So, so that's the thought about language.
But wait, okay, I know that I have the other question. I'm going to
Okay.
bookmark it because I want to jump forward.
Okay.
Because now we're on language.
Yeah.
And we right now have been living in the last, I don't know, what would you say, 3 to 4 years, radical shifts
Mm-hmm.
in our immigration policy and
Mm-hmm.
stand as a country. Just in the
Mm-hmm.
last 5 years, we went from
Mm-hmm.
Obama to Trump to now Biden. And the narratives that are appended to that policy and in the national imagination,
Mm-hmm.
the language we use
Mm-hmm.
is equally varied and variable, right? So we go from, it's jumbled. There's an illegal alien crisis at the border. There's a humanitarian crisis at the border. There are roving caravans. There are refugees, right? There are children in cages. The language is so fraught. So in this shifting terrain in which is xenophobia and racism, authoritarian, all of those that I've named earlier, misinformation, are in play, these sort of competing narratives.
Mm-hmm.
What are we getting right in our language? I'm sorry to pull us out, but we were literally right in this way.
Yeah.
What are we getting wrong with the narratives, with the way we're using language about displacement and migration? What are your
Yeah.
on that?
I think what I find interesting is that the we is always already a split entity.
Interesting.
Some people are getting it right. They're doing the work.
Mhm.
And some people don't care. And that's okay. Thus always was ever the world, you know. There's a lot that's happening around language. And as usual, young people are showing us the way.
Mhm.
You know, if somebody says, what do they even want? You know, pronouns, this and that. And young people say, what's the big deal about respecting how somebody else wants to be addressed? Who hurt you? You know, Why is that so hard? You know, you feel that that is really offending your sense of your security in the world, having to address somebody as they wish to be addressed. So I think language is being gotten right there. You know, we're much more sensitive to the issue of the trans, you know, the needs of the trans members of our community. And language is one of the places where that is happening. You know, I think that the way that minoritized peoples are speaking up for how they want to be thought of and spoken to is important also. And that's teaching us a great deal. I think when it comes to immigration, I think we suffer in general from a great deal of American solipsism. And in fact, that question leads me back to the one that I need to answer, which is this question of, you know, when you say things very strongly, you risk alienating people. What I would like to say to everybody who's listening right now is that in the political crises of this moment, I urge all of you, don't take your eye off the ball of where the deeper problem lies. Everybody's got a point on some level. Yeah, sure. If somebody's saying, oh, somebody misspoke and then they got fired and they'd been in that career for 40 years. And I get it. Nobody likes mobs, you know. Nobody wants their good intention to be turned on its head. And nobody wants to be excessively penalized for a minor mistake. I'm not deaf to that. But for the love of God, where is the bigger problem? People are in desperate poverty and dispossession in this country, and it aggregates around racial lines. It aggregates around gender lines. The biggest problem is not how nervous you feel as a white man because you think you might say the wrong thing. Don't try to make that into the biggest problem. It is a problem. It's a small problem. I respect you. I see that it's a problem, but it's a small problem. The big problem is that you go back home at the end of the day and all your neighbors are white. And it's a nice school district. That's a big problem. So when somebody is saying, oh, all these forces of woke and all of this, and I'm saying there are people who don't have health insurance.
Yep.
There's a family I know of here in Boston that lives on someone's porch, a family of 4. They live on someone's screened in porch with space heaters. I can't say more about it than that. There's problems, you know? And the ethical responsibility is not just to both sides everything and say there's problems here and problems here. The ethical responsibility is to identify what is more urgent. Way Black folks are being treated in America in 2021 is far more urgent than somebody who is like, well, I'm a left-leaning white person, but I just think, you know, some of this language makes me uncomfortable. You know, and I think it's important, you know, that we listen to people who are saying it gently to us. I'm saying it gently because, you know, some of my brothers and sisters are not going to say it this gently.
I'm not quite sure it's completely gently, Teju.
Oh, no, I'm so gentle. I'm so gentle. I'm saying we're all in this together, but understand the fierce urgency of now.
Yes.
MLK wrote to those white preachers and he said, you keep counseling patience.
Yes.
Like, I don't think you understand how urgent this is.
Yeah.
And when I start seeing these small complaints about, there are some people whose entire political crisis is about whether trans people, whether trans girls are going to be allowed to play girls' sports. Really? That is the major crisis about whether somebody can use a certain bathroom? You need to check yourself. There's folks dying on the border, and it's race driven. They're dying on the border because they're Latin. Like I think a lot of our interlocutors are good people. I think they need to be shaken awake a little bit about their priorities. So when I say something like the white savior industrial complex and it raises people's hackles, it's like, well, yeah, that's you. Those hackles that are being raised, that's your body registering the truth that you might not even be ready for.
Interesting. Well, and I mean, the truth is, another truth is that this is all, one word to call it is work.
Mm-hmm.
We all enter into the fray of trying to make a more just world, and we learn as we go.
Mm-hmm.
And we misstep, we mistake.
That's right. That's
we
right.
have to get corrected.
Yes.
It is a learning process, and sometimes it's a very deeply uncomfortable one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's also a discomforting one. So I'm sensitive to time. I have 5 million questions about ethics and photography and dehumanization of subjects and aestheticization and so forth. But before I do all of that, I actually want to turn to Carrie. Carrie, I think people have been asking questions, and I want to bring some of the living questions
Sure.
into this conversation. So one question is, how can arts humanities teachers educate their students into something beyond whiteness?
It seems like an easy question. It's a little bit complicated. And it's complicated because I actually don't know what the assumption of the questioner is. Are we talking about a white teacher teaching white students?
Mm-hmm.
Are we talking about a Black teacher teaching Asian students? Are we talking about Black students or students of color who have a certain kind of embodied knowing? I mean, I said at the beginning that I was educated in a lot of whiteness because that's what the canon looks like. But I mean, I survived it because I was carrying a lot of Blackness with me already. Those 17 years in Nigeria also were not nothing, So even if I was in an environment that was telling me that Beethoven or Bruce Springsteen or whatever it was the peak of what folks cared about, the Fela Kuti that's in my bloodstream was also protecting me.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think there can be a general answer to this. I think what we can do is collectively be sensitive to the kind of deep unfairness of being members of a country, all of us, that has committed and is committing epistemicide, the obliteration of other people's ways of knowing. That's happened with Native and Indigenous Americans. We've said the ways they know things don't matter, We've tried to wipe it out. The way Black folks know things there's been attempts to wipe it out.
Indigenous language is dying, literally.
Dying,
Literally in the project of saving the language, documenting
Right.
dying language. It's
So I think being propelled by the sense of unfairness of that these are things that are flattening our humanity, regardless of what our color is, you know. The ways in which Black ways of knowing in the American mainstream can often be dismissed or condescended to, like the way people respond to African American vernacular English, for example, you know, as being somehow funny, or they're just tolerating it in some ways.
or incorrect, right?
Or simply incorrect.
Correct. There's
You
no
know?
system there. There's no meat.
Right.
Mhm.
You froze. Are you back? Can I hear you?
I am back.
Oh, okay.
But if you just keep
Is
talking,
it maybe maybe I'm the one who froze,
I think you
because
froze.
maybe I
It's okay.
froze. Uh-oh.
Well,
See,
listen,
you never can tell on Zoom.
you never know.
No, look, there's an ethical question there too, right?
Yes.
Because you think the problem is the other person. You think they're the ones who are speaking incorrectly. It turns out the whole time it was your system that was unstable.
It's actually a profoundly perfect.
It might be a drop mic moment right here.
My first assumption
Yeah.
is like, something's wrong with them. And
Absolutely.
then I'm like, actually, you need to check and just turn that in.
That's right. I mean, so one of the things that whiteness has done for us pedagogically is look at all of us and say, your system's unstable.
Yes.
I think you're freezing. That's not really working.
Yeah.
The whole time, it turns out they're the ones who are glitching.
Yeah, we do this. Let's take the English department, for instance, right?
For
English
example.
all over the country, right?
That's right. That's right.
Are saying, hey, we need you to diversify. We need you to actually expand what you think of as the canon.
That's right. That's right.
And many of us who are in the academy 20 plus years.
That's right.
Our initial response is, you've glitched. There's something wrong.
Yeah. Because we know what the canon looks like.
There's something wrong with you, kiddo.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And in fact, what the students are saying is that there are many, many canons, and you have curated a canon to the exclusion of all of the other kinds of languages and kinds of knowledge that use literature and language as a means of expression. And you have a problem, and we don't like it. We don't like it at all.
Absolutely.
So our response is typically often, and I mean no disrespect of my colleagues across the country in English departments, deeply defensive, sometimes aggressive, and so forth. I'm getting a bunch of questions. So I'm gonna throw.
Okay, sure. Let's.
These students they're fabulous. They have questions about, they want your writerly and artistic advice, Teju. They want to know about authorial voice and how you manipulate the novel structure to fit voice. Is that something that you actually do? How do you think about a process, and how do you come up with ideas?
Okay, that's already a very complicated question, but I'll try to be succinct. A question like this one, there cannot be any kind of final answer for, but I can talk about what I'm working on recently and some moves I've been making. For example, I'm working on a novel, which probably won't be in the world for another couple of years, but in the past 3 or 4 days, I wrote about 5 pages. I've been kind of ruminating on those pages for a while before I wrote them. And then it sort of came out like, 1 or 2 pages at a time. So that's a kind of first draft. The next move after that is to read it out loud to myself, because that really tells me something about the flow of it. At this point, I'm almost actually I mean, it's pretty cleanly written, but it has not achieved its final form on the page because I want to know how it sounds.
Are you listening for music?
I am listening for the music of it.
Yes.
And I'm also looking for needless repetitions,
Yes.
but I'm also looking for repetitions that should be there and they're not there.
Yes.
So if I'm doing something that has an arc that is page 1 to page 5, around page 5, I really should be resurfacing something that has happened on page 1 already.
Mm-hmm.
You know, another thing that I spent a lot of today doing was I was removing commas. You know, it was getting a little bit too precious. There was too much breathing inside it. And so I removed a bunch of commas, and now I could see it as a lot cleaner. So, you know, those are some practical things, but, you know, the basic advice is the most basic one of all, which is make time to do self-study on a work. So for myself, I'll read an entire novel by somebody else, just to get into somebody else's rhythm, see what they're doing, see what they've done. It's impossible for me to read an entire novel and not get 2 or 3 ideas about something I want to change in my own work.
Or something you don't want to do.
Or something I don't want to do, you know. When I'm writing fiction or nonfiction, I'll watch films. So watching Bradley's Time gave me some ideas about, you know, spacing and pacing and what I want to think about, you know.
So become a student of all things.
Of all things, you've got to be an open set of windows, you know. You've got to have that circulation there. Because what you know is not enough. So invite them in.
There's another question here that builds on something, this sort of strain that we've been talking about. Considering the loss of different cultures' ways of knowing, what is your attitude towards appropriation in the arts? Are you more wary of people adapting foreign cultures into their own, or do you see it as helpful to preservation? What are the important considerations? Music, culinary, and language are the first arts that come to mind for this person.
It's a good question. It takes us back to an earlier consideration, right? Because if we say something like appropriation, what it conjures up in our minds is dueling op-eds in newspapers, right? There might be somebody, let me not identify this person by age or race or gender. But there might be somebody who says, what is this nonsense? Everybody appropriates all the time. What are you people so worried about, right? But even framing it that way, as I've told that story, you can guess exactly what demographic that person fits in. Why so? Why is that person eager to say, this is all nonsense? Is there something that is being said in that conversation that they don't want to hear, that they find threatening? Because for me, what is being said in that conversation is our historical inheritance is that the worlds of others have been cannibalized. Their labor, their bodies, whether it's slavery or indenture, their art. This idea that those people over there are subtle enough to make art, but they're not smart enough to appreciate it. So we've got to bring it over to Boston and display it in our museums here because we get it. That's cannibalism. You know, we're eating the ways of life of others. And I think appropriation then just becomes a garden variety form of this. You know, arrogating yourself and thinking you have the right to take anything you want to. it's colonial, it's imperial, and generally I'm not that interested in making rules for anyone about anything. And the people who write the anti-arguments says there's no such thing as appropriation, everybody can do, as writers, we're supposed to be free or whatever. The moment I read something like that, I know that that means somebody does not want to have to bother with being thoughtful. Listen, so much of the world comes to us through the internet these days. Yeah. So much of it. So social media, but also the newspapers, much of what we are reading. And I think the key question to ask as individuals, when we're seeing this stuff that's out there, when we're seeing the ridiculousness, the ridiculous takes or whatever, is to just say, who is this person? Mm-hmm. No, but really, who are they? Mm-hmm. And to whom are they speaking?
Mm-hmm. I wish more people would ask that question of curators.
But really, I mean, who, okay. Oh, somebody said that. Okay, nice. Who are they? To whom are they speaking? What is their formation? What is their priority? Why am I arguing until I'm blue in the face with somebody? They don't love me.
They don't even understand.
They don't love me. They don't. My pain doesn't mean anything to them. It's a friendly debate. Let's debate. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to debate my humanity.
Yes.
So is it right to appropriate other people's worlds? Well, is it right to break into other people's houses and take their stuff? Mm-hmm. I don't know. You decide, Is it right if somebody invites you over to their house for dinner to use the fork and plate that was set before you for dinner? I don't know. What do you think? Do you know what I mean? There's context, there's respect. And that does not just apply to people's houses, that applies to culture, But because we are so attached to the language of it's my right, rather than the language of how do we build community, how do we love each other, how do we respect other people, and specifically, how do we respect people who historically we have disrespected? If we ask the question that way, we would each be able to come up with the answers we need to.
I want to thank you for this very thoughtful conversation. I want to end with a question of yours. Tomorrow you're going to visit some students. And, if you could ask that group of students a question, what would it be?
Oh, wow. I think I would ask them about a question that they might have for people of my generation and older. In other words, I would say, I think you guys are doing great. I feel we're in your way a little bit.
Interesting.
What do you wish we would do to make the world that you're trying to bring into being? What do you wish we would do to help you make that happen? As your teachers, as your elders, what are our blind spots? We are in the roles of teachers and we're telling you how it is, but we're not necessarily listening to you enough. What do you want to tell us?
You may get an answer tomorrow.
Okay.
Our beloved student.
I would be very delighted to.
I will be so interested to see, to hear what they have to say. Teju, I have So enjoyed talking to you. I did not get through any of the questions that I wrote out.
Do you want to? I mean, I think we've still got some people in the room with us. We can do another 5 minutes if you want.
No,
Yeah,
no.
okay, all right.
I think ending with the question for these young folks, which is, in what ways are we in your way? And how would you have us move? I think is perfect. And
Yeah, well, I wanna thank today's audience. It almost sounds um it almost sounds funny to say you guys have been a great audience since I can't see any of them, but they have been a great audience because from the quality of questions that we got, the thoughtfulness, the general vibe, so many people want to do better. I'm so encouraged because we have a sense of thoughtfulness and common purpose. We're all so vulnerable to the heckler's veto, the loud and obnoxious voices that dominate online spaces, that we have to remind ourselves and remind each other that actually most of us are working to be more thoughtful and to do better and to love each other and to not do violence to each other. So this has been a great audience, and Crystal, it's been so good to talk to you. Your students are very, very fortunate in you, and I look forward to tomorrow as well.
thank you for coming over to be you.
Yes, absolutely.
Have a good day tomorrow. I won't be there. Carrie, Jim, Harvey, everybody who put this together, thank you very much. And for those of you who've stayed with us here for the last hour and 20, thank you very much. And for your thoughtfulness and your good questions and your good spirits. I can feel them through the questions. So thank you so much, everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you all very, very much.
Be well.
Take care. Bye-bye.